During World War II, victory gardeners faced a problem most modern gardeners never consider. Labor was scarce. Men were overseas. Women were working in factories. Children were in school. Nobody had time to plant a garden every single spring. So, they planted something different. They planted crops that would outlive the war, that would outlive rationing, that would outlive them. Perennial vegetables. Plant once, harvest for 20 years, 30 years, some of them forever. In 1943, 20 million American families grew victory gardens. Those gardens produced 40% of the nation's vegetables. But here is what the history books leave out. The smartest victory gardeners did not plant tomatoes and beans every spring. They planted asparagus beds that would feed their grandchildren, rhubarb crowns that would outlast their houses, onions that replanted themselves automatically. One planting, decades of food. After the war ended, something changed. The seed industry grew, the fertilizer industry grew, the pesticide industry grew, and suddenly, perennial vegetables disappeared from garden catalogs. Annual crops need seeds every year. Perennial crops do not. Annual crops need fertilizer every year. Perennial crops do not. Annual crops make money every year. Perennial crops do not. You can probably guess what happened next. Here are 13 World War II perennial crops that still produce food for 20 years or more. Most gardeners have never heard of half of them. Number 1. Asparagus. The crown jewel of perennial vegetables. Plant asparagus once and harvest it for 15 to 30 years. Some well-maintained beds have produced for over 50 years. That is not an exaggeration. That is documented agricultural history. During World War II, asparagus beds were prioritized in victory gardens specifically because they required no replanting. When labor was scarce and every hour mattered, a crop that came back automatically was worth its weight in gold. The Romans cultivated asparagus 2,000 years ago. They understood something we have forgotten. The best crops are the ones you plant once. Here is how asparagus works. You plant crowns in spring. You wait 2 to 3 years without harvesting anything. You let the roots establish. Then, starting in year 3, you harvest spears every spring for the next 2 or 3 decades. One asparagus crown produces 15 to 25 spears per year at maturity. A bed of 25 plants feeds a family of 4 with fresh asparagus every spring, forever. The patience required is the reason most modern gardeners never plant asparagus. We want results now. We want harvest this season. Victory gardeners thought differently. They thought in decades. They planted for their grandchildren. One weekend of work in 1942, 30 years of harvest. That is the asparagus equation, and it still works today. Number 2, rhubarb. If asparagus is the crown jewel, rhubarb is the survivor. Rhubarb plants can live 15 to 50 years under normal conditions. But here is the remarkable part. Some rhubarb plants have been documented at over 100 years old, still producing, still thriving. During wartime rationing, rhubarb earned a special nickname, the pie plant. When sugar was scarce and fruit was expensive, rhubarb provided the tartness and filling that families craved. One rhubarb plant produces 3 to 4 pounds of stalks per year, enough for dozens of pies, enough to can and preserve for winter. Drive through rural America today, and you will find rhubarb growing at abandoned homesteads. The houses collapsed decades ago. The barns rotted away. But the rhubarb keeps growing. That is the power of perennial agriculture. It outlasts everything. Rhubarb requires almost nothing once established. It tolerates neglect. It survives harsh winters. It comes back every spring without fail. The catch: only the stalks are edible. The leaves contain oxalic acid at toxic levels. Never eat rhubarb leaves, but the stalks. The beautiful red and green stalks. They will feed your family for half a century if you plant them correctly. One crown, 50 years. Your great-grandchildren will thank you. Number 3, American groundnut. This is the crop that saved the Pilgrims. When the first colonists arrived at Plymouth Rock in 1620, they faced starvation. The Native Americans showed them a vine growing wild along riverbanks, underground. That vine produced strings of edible tubers, like potatoes on a necklace. The colonists called it groundnut. The scientific name is Apios americana, and it kept them alive through that first brutal winter. For centuries, Native Americans had cultivated groundnut as a staple food. It was one of their most important crops. And then, European agriculture arrived and it was forgotten. Here is what makes groundnut remarkable. The tubers contain 3 times more protein than potatoes. They also contain genistein, a compound that researchers have linked to reduced cancer rates. And the plant is a legume. It fixes nitrogen in the soil. It actually improves your garden while feeding you. Groundnut is a perennial vine. Plant the tubers once, and they spread underground, producing more tubers every year, forever. The vine dies back in winter and regrows in spring. The tubers wait underground until you need them. This crop fed indigenous peoples for thousands of years. It saved European colonists from starvation, and today, almost nobody grows it. You can still buy groundnut tubers from specialty nurseries. Plant them along a fence or trellis. History will repeat itself. The question is whether you will be ready. Number 4. Horseradish. This is the perennial that refuses to die. Plant horseradish once and you will have it forever. Not because it is well behaved, because it is impossible to kill. Any root fragment left in the soil regenerates into a new plant. Gardeners have tried to eradicate horseradish for decades and failed. During World War II, horseradish provided flavor when spices were unavailable. The roots stored indefinitely in root cellars. One plant supplied enough pungent heat for an entire year of meals. The history goes back thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians used horseradish. Greeks and Romans prized it. European colonists brought it to North America where it thrived. Here is the warning. Horseradish is considered invasive. Plant it in a contained area, or it will take over your entire garden. Some gardeners plant it inside buried containers or along fence lines, where spreading does not matter. But if you want a perennial crop that produces food, no matter what happens, no matter how bad the conditions, no matter how much you neglect it, horseradish is your answer. Dig the roots in fall after frost. Grate them fresh. The heat will clear your sinuses and remind you that some plants simply refuse to quit. Number 5. Egyptian walking onion. This is the onion that plants itself. Most vegetables require you to save seeds, start seedlings, transplant, and tend. Egyptian walking onions skip all of that. They literally walk across your garden and plant themselves. Here is how it works. The plant grows a stalk. At the top of that stalk, instead of flowers, it produces a cluster of tiny bulbs called topsets. The stalk eventually bends under the weight. The topsets touch the ground. They root. A new plant grows. The onion has walked about 2 feet. Next year, it walks again. And again. Forever. During wartime, these onions earned nicknames. Forever onion, winter onion, tree onion. Names that reflected their most valuable trait. They never needed replanting. The history is debated. Some say Napoleon's troops brought them from Egypt to France. Others trace them to ancient Asian gardens. What matters is that they work. Egyptian walking onions provide fresh allium flavor year-round. The green tops work like scallions. The underground bulbs work like shallots. The topsets can be pickled or planted. One purchase. Infinite onions. The plant multiplies both above and below ground. It survives harsh winters. It requires almost no care. This is what self-perpetuating agriculture looks like. Your grandparents understood it. The seed companies made sure you forgot. Number 6. Sorrel. The forgotten green of European kitchens. Sorrel has been cultivated for over 5,000 years. It grows wild across Europe, Asia, and North America. And almost nobody in America grows it today. During World War II, sorrel provided something precious, vitamin C. The lemony tang of sorrel leaves meant fresh nutrition when citrus was unavailable or too expensive. A single sorrel planting produces for 8 to 10 years. The plant self-seeds freely, meaning it can persist in a garden indefinitely if allowed to go to flower occasionally. Sorrel is one of the first perennial greens ready in spring. While you are still waiting for lettuce seeds to germinate, sorrel is already producing tender leaves. The flavor is distinctive. Bright, tart, lemony. French cuisine features sorrel in soups and sauces. The classic potage à oser has fed French families for centuries. Young leaves work raw in salads. Older leaves cook down into sauces and soups. The plant tolerates poor soil and partial shade. One planting. A decade of harvests, fresh greens when nothing else is growing. Sorrel was common in every European kitchen garden. It should be common in yours. Number 7. Globe artichoke. The Mediterranean aristocrat. Globe artichokes produce 15 to 20 edible flower buds per plant each year. In mild climates, they are true perennials lasting 5 to 7 years before needing division and replanting. Victory gardens in California and the Mediterranean featured artichokes prominently. The plants required no annual replanting. The harvests were substantial. The nutrition was excellent. Ancient Mediterranean civilizations cultivated artichokes for thousands of years. The Romans considered them a delicacy. Spanish colonists brought them to California where they thrived in the coastal climate. Here is the climate caveat. Globe artichokes are true perennials only in zones 7 and warmer. In colder climates, they can be grown as annuals with winter protection, but they lose their perennial advantage. If you live in a mild climate, artichokes are extraordinary. Each plant becomes a 4-foot mound of silvery foliage. In spring and fall, the edible buds emerge. You harvest them before the purple flowers open. 1 artichoke plant. 7 years of production. Over 100 artichokes per plant lifetime. After 7 years, divide the plant, replant the divisions. The cycle continues indefinitely. For gardeners in the right climate, globe artichokes deliver serious food production with minimal annual effort. Number 8. Good King Henry. The medieval vegetable, that time, forgot. Good King Henry was grown in European cottage gardens for centuries. The name supposedly honors a German elf king called Guter Heinrich. Archaeologists have found its pollen in ancient sites. It was that common. Here is what makes this plant remarkable. It produces 3 vegetables in one. The young shoots can be harvested and cooked like asparagus. The leaves can be harvested and cooked like spinach. The seeds can be harvested and cooked like quinoa. 3 crops, 1 plant, 10 to 15 years of production. During the Middle Ages, Good King Henry grew in nearly every British kitchen garden. It was a staple, a reliable producer, a plant that required almost no attention. Then, something happened. Faster-growing annual spinach became available. Gardeners wanted quicker results. Good King Henry fell out of favor. By World War II, it was already becoming rare. Today, you can still find seeds from specialty suppliers. The plant tolerates shade, poor soil, and neglect. It self-seeds freely. This is a vegetable that fed Europeans for 1,000 years. It disappeared not because it stopped working. It disappeared because we stopped being patient. Good King Henry is waiting to be rediscovered, perhaps in your garden. Number 9. Sea kale. The Victorian luxury that vanished. In 19th century Britain, sea kale cost more than beef. Wealthy families forced the shoots under clay pots to produce pale, tender stems. It was a delicacy served at the finest tables. Thomas Jefferson grew sea kale at Monticello. He recorded planting it in 1809 and called it one of his favorite vegetables. The Founding Fathers understood perennial agriculture. Sea kale is native to European coastlines. It tolerates salt spray and poor soil. Once established, plants produce for 10 to 15 years. Here is why sea kale disappeared. It could not be mechanized. The traditional harvest requires blanching. You cover the emerging shoots with pots or straw to block light. The shoots grow pale and tender. This is labor-intensive. It does not scale to industrial agriculture. When farming industrialized after World War II, crops that required hand labor vanished from commercial production. Sea kale was one of them. But for home gardeners, the economics are different. You are not paying labor costs. You are investing your own time for your own food. Sea kale plants are available from specialty nurseries. They grow easily from root cuttings. In spring, cover the emerging shoots and harvest the blanched stems. A Victorian delicacy, a Founding Fathers' favorite, yours for the planting. Number 10. Lovage. Celery that comes back every year. If you have ever tried to grow celery, you know the struggle. Celery is fussy. It needs consistent moisture. It bolts in heat. It requires a long growing season. Lovage solves all of those problems. Lovage tastes like celery. Stronger, actually. Some describe it as celery on steroids. The leaves, stems, roots, and seeds are all edible. One plant provides enough celery flavor for an entire household. During World War II, European gardeners used lovage as both a celery substitute and a salt substitute. The leaves dried well and stored indefinitely. The history goes back to Charlemagne. Around 800 AD, the emperor decreed that lovage must be grown in all royal gardens. Monastery herb gardens featured it for centuries. Lovage is a hardy perennial lasting 8 to 15 years. It grows 4 to 6 feet tall at maturity. It self-seeds if allowed to flower. Plant lovage once, and forget about struggling with celery ever again. The flavor is there. The reliability is there. The perennial nature means no annual replanting. One plant, 15 years of harvest. Celery flavor whenever you need it. This is the kind of practical wisdom that built sustainable gardens for centuries. Number 11. Tree collards. Kale that lives for 20 years. Most people think of kale and collards as annual crops. Plant in spring, harvest in summer and fall, replant next year. Tree collards break that pattern completely. These are ancient varieties of Brassica oleracea that grow into woody shrubs 5 to 6 feet tall. They produce edible leaves continuously. In mild climates, they live for up to 20 years. Wartime gardeners valued any perennial brassica that eliminated annual replanting. Tree collards and walking stick kale represented the old way of growing greens, the sustainable way. The plants are propagated from cuttings, not seeds. This is how they have been passed down through generations. Gardener to gardener, cutting to cutting. Some lineages trace back decades. Tree collards are hardy to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. They grow best in zones 8 and 9. In colder climates, they can be grown in containers and brought inside for winter. Here is the remarkable part. You can harvest leaves year-round. The plant keeps producing. There is no bolting, no end of season. 20 years of continuous greens from one planting. No seeds to buy, no transplants to start. Just walk outside and pick dinner. This is perennial agriculture at its finest. And it has been quietly growing in backyard gardens while everyone else buys kale at the grocery store. Number trays, scarlet runner beans. The perennial bean that hummingbirds love. Most gardeners think all beans are annuals. Plant seeds in spring, harvest pods in summer, compost the plants in fall, start over next year. Scarlet runner beans are different. In zones 7 and warmer, the roots survive winter. The tuberous roots store energy underground. In spring, the vines regrow from those roots. No replanting necessary. Native Americans cultivated scarlet runner beans for over 2,000 years before European contact. Thomas Jefferson grew them at Monticello. World War II Victory Garden catalogs listed them as both food crops and ornamentals. The brilliant red flowers attract hummingbirds. The pods are edible young as snap beans. The mature seeds are edible as dried beans. The plant is beautiful and productive. Here is the dual-purpose advantage. Even in cold climates where the roots die over winter, scarlet runner beans self-seed aggressively. Let some pods mature and drop. Next spring, new plants emerge from the fallen seeds. Either way, you get beans with minimal effort. 7 to 10 years of production from perennial roots in mild climates. Indefinite production from self-seeding in any climate. This is the bean that keeps giving. Food and beauty. Hummingbirds and harvests. All from one planting. During World War II, Victory gardeners faced a choice. They could plant annual crops that required replanting every spring. Or they could plant perennial crops that would outlive the war, outlive rationing, outlive them. The smartest gardeners chose perennials. They planted asparagus beds that their grandchildren still harvest today. They planted rhubarb crowns that outlasted the houses they lived in. They planted crops that required one investment of labor for decades of return. Then the war ended. The seed companies grew, the fertilizer companies grew, and perennial vegetables quietly disappeared from garden catalogs and agricultural education. Annual crops create annual customers. Perennial crops do not. Today, 13 crops still wait, still ready, still capable of producing food for 20 years or more from a single planting. Asparagus, rhubarb, American groundnut, horseradish, Egyptian walking onion, sorrel, globe artichoke, good King Henry, sea kale, lovage, tree collards, chives, scarlet runner beans. Your great-grandparents knew these plants by name. They planned their gardens in decades, not seasons. The grocery stores are one crisis away from empty shelves. The supply chains are one disaster away from collapse. But a perennial garden keeps producing. Year after year, decade after decade. Plant once, harvest for 20 years. The Victory gardeners understood this. Perhaps it is time we remembered.